Have you ever been told you're too sensitive? Maybe you cry at things others brush off. You feel the emotional undercurrent in a conversation long after it's over. You notice the pain in someone's eyes when no one else even looks up. And maybe you've wondered, what's wrong with me? But what if I told you that this sensitivity isn't weakness? That it's a kind of deep perception, a quiet wisdom, a radar tuned to frequencies most people miss. And yes, it hurts. It can make the world feel loud, sharp, unkind. But this pain, this ache you carry, it may be proof that you're alive in a way most people aren't. And if you've ever wanted to numb it, silence it, shut it off, stay with me. Because buried inside that sensitivity is something powerful, something the world desperately needs. There's a loneliness that sensitivity carries, a kind of invisible exile. Not because you're alone, but because the way you experience the world rarely aligns with the people around you. You feel things in high resolution. The moods of others, the subtle tones of a room, the unspoken tensions, they don't just pass you by, they settle into you. Sometimes gently, sometimes like a storm, and often you don't know what to do with all that feeling. As a child, maybe you cried during sad commercials or felt overwhelmed in noisy classrooms. As an adult, you might find parties draining, not because you dislike people, but because it feels like being thrown into a sea of emotional static. You're not just having a conversation, you're absorbing someone else's energy, their history, their pain. It clings to you. But when you try to explain this, most people don't understand. They say you're too much, too soft, too sensitive. And slowly, those words begin to harden into a story you tell yourself, that your depth is a defect, that feeling too deeply is a kind of failure. So you start editing yourself. You learn to hold back tears in public. You pretend that certain things don't hurt as much as they do. You laugh when something wounds you just to avoid the weight of being misunderstood. You become an actor in your own life, smiling through overstimulation, nodding through discomfort, folding yourself smaller so others won't be inconvenienced by your intensity. But none of that makes the feelings go away. It just makes you lonelier. There is a kind of grief in sensitivity, not only because the world can be brutal and loud, but because you're constantly witnessing things that others ignore. The kindness in a stranger's glance, the quiet suffering in someone's silence, the fragile beauty of a moment that will never come again. Even joy, when you're deeply sensitive, can feel unbearable. A certain kind of music can move you to tears. A small act of compassion can break you open. There's a sweetness in it, but also a sharpness. You feel how fleeting it all is, how everything you love is already slipping away even as you hold it. That's the curse and gift of emotional depth. Nothing is ever just surface. But let's be clear, this isn't melodrama. It's not weakness, it's not an inability to cope. In fact, it's often the opposite. Sensitivity means your nervous system is finely tuned. Your perception reaches farther. You're affected because you're aware. You're moved because you're paying attention. You're hurt because you care. And while that caring can feel like a burden, it's also a kind of wisdom. You understand people, not through logic or analysis, but through intuition, feeling, and resonance. That's not something you can fake. It's not something you can teach. But it does come with a cost. When you feel this much, boundaries become essential, and yet they're often the hardest thing to create. You want to help. You want to connect. You want to be open. But openness without protection becomes erosion. Slowly you lose pieces of yourself trying to carry everyone else's emotions. And in those moments, when the weight becomes too much, you might wish you could turn it off. You might fantasize about being the kind of person who doesn't notice, doesn't feel, doesn't ache. But if you've ever truly tried to shut it all down, you know the price. Numbness may protect you, but it also robs you of meaning, of connection, of the very things that make life worth feeling. So perhaps the answer isn't to feel less, but to feel differently. To stop seeing your sensitivity as a flaw and begin understanding it as a form of perception. A kind of inner vision that allows you to see beauty, pain, and truth with unfiltered clarity. And yes, that vision can be overwhelming, but it can also be illuminating. Because in a world that often celebrates detachment, cynicism, and noise, your sensitivity is a quiet rebellion, a reminder that tenderness is not a weakness, but a strength. That those who feel deeply are not fragile. They're fierce in a different way. In the next section, we'll explore the science behind this emotional intensity, why your brain responds so strongly, and how understanding the roots of sensitivity can help you stop blaming yourself for the way you are. Because you're not broken. You're just built to feel. Before we can truly honor this sensitivity, before we can stop apologizing for it, we have to understand where it comes from. Not just emotionally, but biologically. Because this isn't just a matter of personality or mood. There are structures in your brain, patterns in your nervous system, that make you more receptive, more responsive, more awake to the world. And when you begin to see that your sensitivity is wired into your being, not as a flaw, but as a fundamental part of who you are, something begins to shift. The shame loosens, the confusion fades, and in its place, you begin to find a kind of quiet confidence. So let's look beneath the surface, into the science of why you feel so much, so we can begin to reshape how you carry it. To understand sensitivity, we need to leave the realm of poetry for a moment and enter the body. Because as ethereal as it feels, sensitivity isn't just emotional. It's physical, it's neurological, it's real. Research into what's called the highly sensitive person, HSP, a term coined by psychologist Dr. Elaine Aron, has revealed that about 15 to 20% of the population possesses a nervous system that is more finely attuned to subtle stimuli. This isn't a diagnosis or disorder. It's a temperament, a biological trait observed across human beings, and even in over 100 animal species. In sensitive individuals, several brain areas light up more intensely in response to sensory, emotional, and social information. One of these is the insula, a region involved in emotional awareness and empathy. Another is the amygdala, the brain's threat detector, which tends to be more reactive, alerting you to emotional shifts or potential danger faster than it might for others. This isn't paranoia, it's heightened perception. You notice micro-expressions, tiny shifts in someone's face that signal discomfort or insincerity. You pick up on tones of voice, background noise, even lighting. Your body records all of it, even if your conscious mind hasn't caught up yet. But that constant input has a cost. It means your system can easily become overloaded. This is why environments that others find stimulating, crowded malls, busy offices, loud gatherings, can quickly feel exhausting. Your brain isn't just processing what's obvious, it's taking in what's ambient, invisible, peripheral. And that processing takes energy. At the same time, your mirror neuron system, the part of the brain involved in empathy and social resonance, is often more active. This means you're not just witnessing someone's emotion, you're feeling it. Their sorrow sits in your chest. Their anxiety buzzes in your skin. Their joy uplifts you, but even that can feel overwhelming, like trying to hold sunlight in your hands. And then there's the dopamine system, the brain's reward circuit. Sensitive individuals often have a different relationship with dopamine. You may be less motivated by external rewards, money, status, adrenaline, and more responsive to internal ones, meaning, beauty, harmony. This helps explain why many sensitive people are drawn to the arts, nature, philosophy, spaces where depth is honored over noise. In a world that glorifies stimulation and speed, this can feel like a mismatch. You're not wired for the grind. You're wired for presence, for noticing, for absorbing. And yet that noticing, if unmanaged, can lead to anxiety. If your brain is constantly scanning, constantly feeling, constantly on, it becomes difficult to rest. Sleep may elude you. Small criticisms may echo in your head long after they're spoken. You relive moments, conversations, mistakes, glances, because your system doesn't let go easily. But here's the reframe. This isn't malfunction. It's depth. Your system isn't broken, it's thorough. You feel more because your brain is built for connection, nuance, and reflection. You pause where others rush. You reflect where others react, and that kind of presence is rare. Still, the modern world wasn't built with your nervous system in mind. It rewards speed, surface, certainty. You, on the other hand, are tuned to slowness, depth, and complexity. That's not a weakness, that's an edge, but only if you understand it. Because here's the truth. Your sensitivity doesn't need fixing. It needs tending. The more you understand your own biology, the less you'll shame yourself for needing more rest, more quiet, more space. You're not lazy, you're not dramatic. You're responding to a world that's louder than your body was built for. And when you begin to honor that, when you give your system the stillness it craves, the boundaries it needs, the nourishment it deserves, everything changes. You stop fighting yourself. You start protecting what matters. And from that place of grounded self-understanding, your sensitivity transforms from an unmanageable flood into a channel, a way of being in the world that is clear, rooted, and resilient. In the next section, we'll explore how this emotional and neurological depth isn't just something to manage, it's something that contains wisdom, a hidden kind of intelligence buried in vulnerability, waiting to be uncovered. Now that we understand the biological roots of sensitivity, we can begin to ask a deeper question. Not how do I fix this, but what is this trying to teach me? Because within every vulnerable trait lies a hidden intelligence. Your ability to feel deeply, to notice what others miss, isn't just a quirk of your nervous system. It's a guide, a compass, a quiet form of wisdom that can reshape how you relate to the world, to others, and to yourself. But to see that, we have to look at vulnerability not as exposure, but as access. Vulnerability is often mistaken for weakness, for fragility, for something to be hidden or overcome. But when you live with sensitivity, you begin to see vulnerability differently. You see that it's not the breaking that's the problem, it's the refusal to break that keeps people rigid, closed, and disconnected. To feel deeply is to be touched by the world, and in that touching, something ancient stirs. Think of how children experience things. The way they cry openly, laugh without hesitation. Notice small wonders, a bug on a leaf, the softness of a blanket, the face of someone they love. That openness is natural, unfiltered. Before the world teaches them to armor up, they simply feel. And then, somewhere along the way, we are taught that feeling is dangerous, that to survive we must become hard, that to succeed we must stay unaffected. And so we build walls, we protect, we perform strength. But here's the paradox. The more we guard ourselves against pain, the less alive we become. The more we suppress, the less we connect. Because connection doesn't happen through perfection. It happens through exposure, through the cracks, through the trembling voice that says, I don't have it all together, but I'm here. The German poet Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, "Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final." That's not just poetic idealism. It's survival advice for the sensitive soul. Vulnerability is the place where transformation happens. When you admit that you're overwhelmed, you open the door to rest. When you let your tears come, you release what your body has been holding. When you stop pretending to be fine, you allow others to truly see you, and sometimes to meet you in that space. Sensitivity sharpens this process. It demands that you become fluent in your own inner world, because if you don't, you drown in it. You have to learn what triggers you, what grounds you, what softens the sharp edges of your experience. This self-awareness becomes a kind of internal compass, and as it sharpens, you begin to recognize vulnerability not as exposure, but as wisdom. Wisdom in knowing your limits, in honoring your energy, in feeling your way through uncertainty rather than bulldozing through it. You begin to see that what makes you soft is also what makes you wise. That your capacity to sit with discomfort, to stay open in pain, is its own kind of strength. In relationships, this sensitivity becomes emotional attunement. You notice when someone withdraws, you sense what words they need, or when silence is kinder. You're not just reacting, you're responding from a place of deep presence. In solitude, it becomes reflection. You process not just what happened, but why it mattered. You find meaning in small things. You begin to see life not as a series of events, but as a living tapestry, woven from color, feeling, nuance. And in art, whether you create it or simply receive it, your sensitivity becomes translation. You carry experiences that others struggle to name. You feel things most people don't have words for. And through that, you become a bridge, a way for others to find themselves in what you express. This is the hidden gift of vulnerability. It makes you a vessel, not for chaos, but for clarity, not for weakness, but for witnessing. You begin to live not with walls, but with roots, not with performance, but with presence. Of course, none of this means that pain disappears. Sensitivity will always carry moments of overwhelm. But when you begin to trust that your softness contains strength, those moments no longer define you. They become part of your rhythm, part of your humanity. In the next section, we'll talk about how to navigate that rhythm, how to protect your energy without numbing your heart. Because it's not enough to feel deeply. You also need practices that help you hold what you feel without losing yourself in it. But what happens when the weight becomes unbearable? When the sensitivity that once felt like a gift begins to feel like a burden? Knowing that your feelings are valid, that your brain is wired differently, offers clarity. But it doesn't make the hard moments disappear. And in those moments, the temptation is strong to shut down, to escape, to numb. But numbing comes at a cost. So how do you stay open without being consumed? How do you protect your softness without building a fortress around it? There comes a point when sensitivity turns into saturation, when the world feels too loud, too bright, too fast, and your nervous system, the same one that lets you feel beauty so vividly, starts to panic under the weight of everything it has absorbed. You may recognize it as exhaustion, or anxiety, or a subtle dread that hums in your chest for no obvious reason. And here's what many sensitive people do in those moments. They shut down. Not always dramatically. Sometimes it's subtle. You scroll for hours. You stop responding to texts. You put on emotional armor. You try to make yourself smaller, quieter, invisible. You might stop trusting people, or your instincts, or your own feelings. Because when you've been overwhelmed too many times, your system starts to believe that vulnerability equals danger, that openness is a liability. So you reach for what numbs: the phone, the food, the performance of being fine. You try to escape the tide of sensation before it pulls you under. But numbing is a tricky thing. It doesn't just mute pain. It muffles joy, too. It silences connection, beauty, awe. It locks you in a kind of emotional grayscale where everything feels quieter, but nothing feels alive. The alternative is not to never shut down. We all need breaks. But the real question is, can you build a way to soften the noise without silencing your soul? This begins with boundaries, not the kind that isolate, but the kind that protect. You're allowed to say no to plans when your body says rest. You're allowed to leave a room that feels wrong. You're allowed to choose stillness over stimulation, not because you're fragile, but because you're wise enough to know your limits. Next comes rhythm. Sensitive people thrive in rhythm. Patterns that calm the body and anchor the mind. Think of it like tuning an instrument. If your nervous system is a harp, the world is constantly pulling at its strings. Without rhythm, everything is dissonant. But with rhythm, morning routines, quiet meals, time in nature, slow walks, deep breaths, you retune yourself. You come back into harmony. Meditation isn't just for monks. It's a tool for people like you, people who feel too much and think too fast. It's not about clearing your mind. It's about making space in it. Like opening a window in a crowded room. Journaling is another lifeline. Sensitive people carry entire emotional ecosystems inside. Putting thoughts into words doesn't just release them. It makes them visible. Tangible. And when something is visible, it can be tended. And then there's art, not as a performance, but as a release. You don't need to be a painter or a poet. You just need to make, to express, to take the formless emotion inside you and give it shape, color, voice. Even simple acts can be sacred. Lighting a candle at the end of the day, playing one song that feels like your soul, washing your face like a ritual instead of a chore. These are not small things. They are how you stay intact in a world that keeps pulling at your edges. And finally, connection, not with everyone, but with the few who see you. The friend you can text without a mask, the partner who understands when you go quiet, the stranger who says exactly what you needed to hear, without even knowing it. These connections don't have to be constant, they just have to be real. Because the truth is, being sensitive is not about feeling everything all the time. It's about learning when to open and when to rest, when to carry, and when to let go. The world will never stop being overwhelming, but you can become someone who moves through it with a kind of quiet. You've learned to feel without drowning, to rest without shutting down, to hold your sensitivity with care instead of shame. But there's something more waiting beyond survival. Something that looks less like coping and more like becoming. Because when sensitivity is no longer something you fight, it begins to shape you. Not into someone softer, but into someone more deeply rooted, more quietly powerful. The kind of person who walks into a room and changes it, not with volume, but with presence. Power doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always arrive with noise or spectacle. Sometimes it walks in softly, unassuming, patient, watchful. The kind of power that doesn't need to dominate a room because it anchors it. This is the kind of power that sensitive people are capable of, the kind that grows from the inside out. But to arrive at that place, something within you must shift. You have to stop waiting for permission. Permission to feel, permission to rest, permission to walk away from things that drain you, even if the world calls them normal. You have to stop apologizing for your emotional fluency and start trusting it as a skill, because that's what it is. Sensitivity, when untempered, can feel like being tossed by waves. But sensitivity, when matured, becomes presence. It's a kind of still water that reflects what's real, not distorted by fear or rush or image. Just clear. And in a noisy world, clarity is magnetic. That clarity begins with self-trust, not the loud, performative confidence we often associate with power, but the quiet assurance that comes from knowing yourself deeply. When you begin to trust your inner landscape, your rhythms, your limits, your instincts, you stop chasing validation. You stop performing peace. You begin living it. And that's when others start to notice. You might speak less, but your words land differently. You might do less, but your presence holds more. You begin to shift from being someone who absorbs the room to someone who shapes it, gently, subtly, but unmistakably. Because your energy no longer leaks, it radiates. This is the power of the quiet force, not to overpower others, but to remain fully rooted in themselves. You see, most people move through life reacting, and that peace becomes contagious. People don't just respect you more, they feel safer around you, because you've done the work of sitting with your own storms. And in doing so, you become someone who can hold space for others, not by fixing them, but simply by being present with them. In relationships, this is transformative. You don't rush to rescue or control. You don't need to be the loudest voice. Instead, you bring stillness, patience, the ability to truly listen, not just to words, but to what lives beneath them. In creative work, your sensitivity becomes a compass. You notice what others overlook. You feel stories that haven't been told yet. You make meaning where others only see mess. And through that, you help people reconnect with themselves. In solitude, your emotional depth no longer feels like a burden. It becomes a sanctuary, a place where clarity rises, where your own voice gets louder than the world's noise, where you remember who you are. And from that solitude, you re-enter the world with intention. You move slower, you speak with precision. You make choices that align and not just impress. And gradually, your life becomes less about managing overwhelm and more about embodying alignment. This is not a fantasy. It's a practice. You will still have days when the world feels too sharp, when your edges fray, when silence feels unreachable. But the difference is, you'll know how to return, to breath, to ritual, to self. You'll know how to come home to yourself again and again, and every time you do, you strengthen the foundation of your quiet force. Because strength isn't how much you can carry, It's how deeply you can stand in your truth without collapsing under the weight of it. It's the ability to be fully awake in a world that numbs, to be open without being shattered, to be soft and still unshakable. You may not see yourself as powerful, but make no mistake, your sensitivity is not passive. It shapes things. It shapes how people feel in your presence. It shapes the tone of conversations. It shapes the way you build, love, create, and connect. And the more you trust it, not to dominate, but to illuminate, the more quietly powerful you become. You don't need to change who you are to be strong. You need to deepen into who you already are. And that, more than anything, is the essence of becoming a quiet force.
You were never too sensitive. You were just tuned to a different frequency, one the world forgot how to hear. And maybe that's your quiet purpose. Not to silence your sensitivity, but to live it so fully, so intentionally, that others remember their own. Because in a time that rushes, you pause. In a world that numbs, you feel. And that is a rare kind of strength. If this spoke to something inside you, if you've ever felt like your emotions were a burden in a world that doesn't understand, know this: you're not alone. There's strength in your softness. There's clarity in your depth. And if you want more spaces like this, more calm, more meaning, more reflection, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. That way, you won't miss what comes next. But more importantly, I'd love to hear from you what part of this resonated most. Drop it in the comments. Your story might help someone else feel a little less alone. Thank you for being here, for feeling, for staying open.